said keep out.
To whom it may concern, if you're reading this document, it means I'm either dead or have disappeared and I'm...
Or you're in a chair.
Dun dun dun!
All right, folks. You are, if you haven't figured it out yet, live with Lit Literature, and we have a special episode today. And we are going to talk about a special short story with our good captain, live from the Shattered Plains, traversed via Stormlight flying to the great land of Chicago, I think. Maybe. I don't know.
Yep, that is indeed where we're at. Thank you, Demon. Happy to be here. And yeah, it's awesome to see you guys in person and finally meet you all for the first time. So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, I'd say you look really different in person than on TV.
See, we always just had this thought, kind of like, that Andrew really was in the computer. And it's so weird to see him live.
It was a technology anomaly. A rip in the fabric of existence.
Speaking of which, that was our new eerie intro, which I randomly YouTubed the second before we started recording on YouTube. And I don't even know what it is, but I'm interested now. It may concern.
It looks like R.L. Stein's something he was doing for Goosebumps.
I thought so too. It looked like the actors from Goosebumps.
Yeah.
But now I'm...
Yeah. It totally has that early to mid 90s vibe.
It definitely does.
Oh, it's the intro to Erie, Indiana.
Oh,
I know what that is. That's like another Goosebumps show that came out a little bit afterwards.
Yeah.
And they dealt with like kind of more semi-realistic stuff like Sasquatch and you know, semi-realistic stuff.
all the eerie shit that exists in the Midwest that we live in. Yeah. Kind of like, you know, Sasquatch. What else does Dresden have to deal with? Pretty much everything, you know, being in the Midwest. So, anyway, folks, we're here today talking about the short story recommended by the captain. Title, sir?
Yeah, The Human Chair by the author Edogawa Ranpo.
Rampo.
We're also with our good friend, the Hitman.
Right, coming from live from inside your chair.
And, yeah, this was...
Wow, it's really creepy coming from you, dude.
I feel good technique I picked up. I'm gonna try it out this weekend.
Anytime you want to wrap some of that dental floss around somebody's own neck,
I feel like
why not hide in their chair?
Yeah.
I feel like we're pretty safe right now, Demon, because we're sitting on a bench.
That's
so
true.
It would be pretty difficult for the misanthropic character of this story to have his way with us. But this was a short story that I heard from another podcast that I listened to, the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
Shout out.
They review a lot of short stories from antiquity, and this was one of them. So I heard about the story from there, and you know, we're all kind of fans of Japanese culture growing up. And so we've, you know, all of us have been to Japan. Jeff actually lived and studied there for a couple years. So this would be a cool piece to tackle since I think we're all into Japanese culture. And this gets on the darker side of that, of said culture.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
And also, I forgot that the captain told me about that whole it's attached to Japanese culture thing. So when I started to read this translation, I was terrified by the insane maniac who was writing this. However, loved it, by the way.
Yeah, the translation is definitely, it has pretty much all the sentences have kind of the same structure. So you could tell that, you know, in the particular translation that we read, you know, I think maybe it wasn't really poetic or literary in any way. It was basically just a straight, like, kanji.
It was really interesting. I think it was almost a direct translation. Maybe I'm wrong, but the way that it read in English when we were reading it was like on beats. Like the way that the person who translated that was using commas and periods was super unique. And I honestly would love to get like John or some of our friends that read fluent Japanese to read the Japanese version to see the feel of that. Because now it wasn't a bad thing that it was that way. It almost set up the insanity of the writer of that letter. Mm-hmm. But it was like, I am here, comma, in your chair, comma, da da. Spoiler alert, by the way, folks. But it was like every sentence had a almost poetic flow to it that ended abruptly, sharp, a very sharp ending to it.
Yeah.
Each sentence, and if the sentence was long, it had multiple comma breaks in it that directly forced you while you were reading it to kind of take that pause, which would have been really interesting to audiobook if they had that version.
Wow, that would be neat.
What kind of weird performance that would have been. It was super cool. But super unique, super cool. And
but I have to say,
go ahead,
I felt differently that it wasn't a direct translation. I thought they put a lot of time into how they translated it.
They very
made
well
it
might have,
flow like that. And the harsh endings, I felt like it was the author's writing style. Like, that's how he wanted it. But I couldn't say for sure.
I know, right? It could be.
My feeling.
And like I said, it could very well be his intention. Mm-hmm. I would love for us to do kind of a recap post this episode where we kind of search into it a little more deeply. Because super interesting. And
he does have a lot of stuff, this author. Are you guys cool with me giving a quick bio pic of this author right now?
Absolutely, you need to.
Cool. So the author of The Human Chair is Edogawa Ranpo, which if you say it really quickly, it obviously sounds like Edgar Allan Poe. And that was very intentional. This author, his real name is Hirai Taro. And he was definitely influenced by the writings of Poe, who would have come about 50 to 60 years earlier. But this particular piece was written in October of 1925. And Edogawa Ranpo is a pretty renowned author from that time period. He definitely was one of the forefront authors of the noir and crime genre, especially among Japanese authors. And he later developed a style that kind of became a cultural phenomenon at the time. And the genre was called Irogoro Nansensu, which combines eroticism, grotesquerie, and nonsensical elements to create a compelling story. And I haven't read any of Ranpo's other pieces, but I know that throughout his works, he is certainly not afraid to touch on pretty much any topic he wants, like that comes to mind. I know for a fact that in some of his other stories, he has a recurring main character who's a physician, and he's a homosexual. So he prefers the company of men. And I don't know if that would have been, looked down on in the 1920s in Japan.
It still is.
Still
now,
is, yeah.
And it would have been, you're talking about ahead of your time and ahead of your culture.
Yeah.
Because it is still looked down upon
Okay.
in the general spectrum of that culture. And, there's a lot of reasons for that, and there's a lot of differences in the Japanese culture to ours. But for him to have that kind of artistic insight, so to speak, really unique. But then again, he's also writing about some creepy shit, too. So,
right.
He's clearly a man who does not stop his mind from wandering anywhere.
Indeed. There are no limitations with this author from what we've experienced.
But that's what
so
you
far.
need. That's what you need for good art and for good storytelling, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Personally, what story is going to be good if you can't push the boundaries somewhere?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, first takes on this piece, I guess. Initial impressions, guys. Did you like this short story?
I'm going to let the hitman go first, and then I'm going to tell you my story.
I really like this story, and I don't read a lot of short stories in general. Mm-hmm. I'm more of a epic fantasy reader, so it's a little bit outside my wheelhouse or my normal experience.
Sure.
I'm only going to pause Ben for a brief moment to state that he loved this story because it gave him great ideas on how to kill people. That's it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ben. Back to being serious.
I liked it. I liked the weirdness and how it just drew me in. That the author in the story, I can't think of her name offhand.
Oh, the
Edogawa.
authoress, Oshiko.
Is
that character's
was
name,
reading letters and just sucked you right in, and then about halfway through, I figured it out that it was her chair.
You did.
Oh my god, when's he gonna get to it?
I did not see that coming.
And it built suspense even more.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I didn't realize it was her chair right away, too. Mainly because when I started it, I had no idea what I was getting into.
Yeah.
And I was just reading a guy who was writing a letter, and that was
what
it.
What gave it away for me was I remembered in the first paragraph, her husband went away and was an ambassador. And then later it says it was auctioned off to an important political figure. Like, oh, that's her husband.
Yep. Bingo.
It all connected eventually.
Yeah.
Way too close to the end, though. I mean, you
man.
wish you had a shotgun. That's a different story altogether.
What about, what do you guys think of the story?
I was just going to say, I did not see that twist in the story coming at all. It completely caught me off guard when she gets to the point where he's like, I really love this woman so much, and in case you haven't figured it out, madame, that person happens to be none other than yourself. And I'm like, oh my God, he's in the chair right now. She's sitting in his lap right now. Dear God.
Can you imagine that? But then he goes on to say, like, oh, but I got out of there later.
Right.
Don't worry about it.
He waved it off. He waved it off.
Can you imagine? Oh my God. I'd be sitting in my chair. I'd be like... Especially when he described, like, cuddling
Yep.
her with
her
his
back and forth.
thighs through
Yep.
the chair.
Yep.
You're like, oh, shit. What a great, ingenious way to both capture simultaneously the emotions of the potential reader and the emotions of the freak in the chair.
Yep.
It was, I mean, it's that you have to acknowledge that kind of genius, because I did feel for that poor, decrepit, weird fuck.
Yeah. There's one scene in the story where, like, the author Edogawa Ranpo really does an awesome job of making you at first really sympathize for this character, because he's like, oh, I'm so ugly, like no woman would ever want me, would ever want to like be near me. And so that's kind of how he gets into this chair scheme that he develops. But then after a while, like, he starts getting a sexual gratification from people sitting in the chair. So it becomes a whole new way for him to like interact with people, and for him to, get stuff that may not necessarily be available to him. But there's one scene where they describe that he's been living in the chair for quite some time.
A few months.
And at night, and at night in the hotel, he like crawls out to get water, and his like legs are like basically broken and malnourished, so he's like slithering across the floor at night, like
he could only crawl
to go to the bathroom and stuff. It's like, oh my God,
he turned himself into the monster.
He did.
And actually, an interesting point is, as a lowly craftsman, he was becoming quite successful and renowned. So much so that he had his own assistant.
Yeah.
And we all know that in reality, at some point, he can use that to his advantage, no matter how ugly he is.
Right.
to like succeed in another fashion or
Because he was so
bridge the
skilled.
gap for his
All
personality.
his clients were rich people, so
Yeah.
all his chairs were extremely expensive.
But he
Right.
chose to kind of go down the whole
dark path.
The dark path. He chose the dark side.
yeah, his whole plan was just to rob the hotel.
Right.
And, then-
Yeah.
and he did.
He did. It started off
He
as a
couldn't
cool.
leave it anyway.
Yeah, he couldn't leave.
He was going to be rich.
He got addicted
have
to
so many riches.
that feeling.
Right. That would be super cool though. And that kind of was a little bit of a surprise when I was reading it. I'm like, man, that's a really kind of a good idea. Like you're in a chair. Nobody would fucking suspect that the furniture did it.
Yep.
So like whenever people hear that there's, stuff getting stolen, he just runs back to his chair and hides. And then people are running past the room like, oh, the thief went that way. He went that way. So, there's a lot of cool like adventure aspect to it too.
Totally. And also the fact that he even in that letter, he says, I could have left with all this money and been like, I didn't even have to do craftsmanship anymore if I didn't want to, even though it clearly was he was very good at it.
Right.
Question though. The only flaw in this story, an unbathed man in your chair for that long would smell like shit.
Especially since he had like pee bags and stuff hanging in there too. Like that would definitely create a funk around that chair. Like, man, this chair is extremely comfortable and it smells like shit.
Yeah,
Every time I sit in this chair, it feels like it cradles me, but it smells really bad.
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing I could come up with was when he's in the hotel, he just went into empty hotel rooms and took a shower. to
So-
clean himself
Oh,
off.
he
I
might
was-
have, yeah.
Yeah, so I was reading this though, and you got to remember the timing of the writing. Number one. Number two, I didn't catch it because I forgot what Dross told us when he recommended it that had anything to do with Japanese culture. So I was reading it from the pretext of like, this might be some kind of an American modern author. And then I get to this point where they're auctioning it off and he's talking about foreign ladies and then
Right.
suddenly Japanese ladies. And I'm like, holy shit, this is in Japan? This makes so much more sense. But the one thing that doesn't make any sense is the shower part. They don't have that shit in 1925. They had onsens, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But could he? I guess
Yeah.
he could sneak out of his chair every night.
Yeah.
Go to an onsen, a public onsen.
no.
This was a European hotel. Like, it was a hotel, I think it was
Western
owned by
style.
Westerns, and it
Yep.
was for Westerners.
Agreed.
So they may have had baths, in there. But
The year was
19.
It was written in 1925.
25, yep.
So something that's really cool. So Japan was really unique at this time because obviously we got up to the point in World War II where they were already kind of militarizing and industrializing enough to compete with Europeans.
right.
Specifically, that comes, though, from if you've seen films like The Last Samurai and some of these other things, you got to remember that in the late 1800s, and early 1900s even, there's some phenomenal literature written by Japanese people who were just converting from being samurai to an industrialized way of thought because of how late.
Right.
And remember, it was the Americans themselves that finally forced them,
They were the pushing factor.
to breach. It's a really unique. We're not going to go into it a ton in this podcast, but there is some literature that you could read, diary and stories that are absolutely phenomenal. Right at this time, when you realize that the Americans basically boated over in an armed military boat and said, open your goddamn borders for trade. Only the Dutch could trade with them at that point.
Wow.
And that opened up the doors for basically this realization that this industrial powerhouses, they wanted to catch up. And
It was a massive culture clash
Right.
for Japan.
which at this time was big because they needed these Western hotels, and it was important for people to appear Western for a while, to have the suits, have the chairs, have these style of things that Europeans or Americans or anybody who's considered Western culture would have, because of the fact that they had to appear that way,
Right,
with all
yeah.
of the new forced trade, even though it was not forced, it was forced. So
Yeah.
very interesting time in history for these people. So it was cool to find out that that's when this story was taking place.
Yeah. That was all part
Here
of the
I thought that
backdrop.
somebody was just hiding in a goddamn awesome lazy boy armchair to kill the director.
And just wondering why the cameras weren't picking it up on videotape. I see him right there.
the
He's
fuck
falling
is
into
this
that
creepy
chair.
asshole doing?
Oh, man. Wow. What is that enormous
Okay.
creature running inside that chair every night?
As it slithers out of the bottom.
Oh, God. I like how he, describes himself as a hermit crab. I can just picture his, disgusting, limbs and, arms, crawling out of it. Yeah.
dude.
Like he's peeling himself out of the chair. It's so gross.
And he says that, and that's one other thing that doesn't add up, because at the end of the store he says he left the house and just put a flag or something in the window and I'll come up to the door.
Right.
You can't walk, dude.
Right, exactly.
how do you do that?
Dude, there's a couple of things, especially with the ending to this story, where it really makes you wonder. Ben and I were talking about it earlier, and we're like, man, because she reads the letter, she's like, oh my God, he could be in my house right now, this is terrible. She's freaking out, and then another servant comes in and is like, oh, you have another letter. It's from the same guy. And he's like, oh, by the way, all of that was fake. I really wasn't in your chair to begin with. And I could totally see her a sigh of relief, oh. And then the camera pans out, and it's at the end of a Twilight Zone episode where she glances over at the chair, and then they show her thinking for a minute, and she gets up and peels back the chair and sees pee bags and stuff inside the chair. It's oh my God, it was real.
Yeah. That's exactly why I recommended, depending on her husband's resources, gun, or at this time in Japan, it probably wouldn't be a shotgun, although I'd recommend that. It would probably be some other kind of rifle or a goddamn samurai sword.
Katana sword, yeah.
Fucking put that katana through that goddamn chair.
And then you just hear a groan emanate from inside the chair. Oh. She's like, all right, I'm glad I checked.
It's really amazing to me that somebody could take a concept like that you would think is so cartoonish,
Yeah.
so strange and outlandish, write it that many years ago,
Yeah.
and then also make it something that you're seriously considering in terms of what?
As a life choice.
Yeah,
and a career choice.
Holy shit. I mean, it really well done.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Cool.
so you heard this on a fellow a literary podcast.
Right. They reviewed it. Yeah, they were equally blown away by it as well, because
I could see
they
that.
didn't see those guys didn't see that twist coming either.
I'm so glad I didn't realize what
Right.
was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't want to. When I was telling you guys about the story, I didn't want to be overt about it and say there's a twist or there's something, a surprise in there. I
good.
wanted it to be totally random, so it would have its full shock value for you guys. So I just said don't look up a synopsis, just read it.
Oh, it was great.
So yeah.
I'm really for those folks who are listening to us online, the three of us here who read it are excitingly pumped to have tried to. Well, I guess we just kind of really want to try to force some of our colleagues to read this because it's freaking awesome. I was hoping that they would.
Yeah.
But we will be toying with this because in future podcasts, just expect the three of us to occasionally throw some random
Chair Easter
hints,
eggs.
chair Easter eggs. Exactly, Captain. Because it's just too fucking good, and they won't get it.
Right.
And I want them to, and also it would be even better as our listeners get it and they don't still.
Right. That would be the ultimate comedy.
It would be. So,
Cool.
I gotta tell you, so when I was reading this, I didn't realize that at first, but I was wondering why it was so choppy. And we have various thoughts, like, could it be translation? Could it be a very, I don't want to say poor translation, just direct translation? Or could it be a very careful translation, strategically? Because that is what the author was. And I don't know the answer to that at all, nor would I pretend to.
Right.
Either way, it hooked me. Because as I was reading it, I was like, what the hell? It was just so on beat. It hooked me immediately. And I had to keep to this strange beat that the author and translator together were conveying to me. And by the end of it, or I want to say the middle, the beats became more subtle. And that might have been purposeful. Whereas if at first they were harsh. In the center, when you're starting to get really nervous, the sentences elongated. The commas became less often. It was just kind of a unique vibe that I had. Sorry, Ben, I didn't mean to cut you off. Man.
No, it's fine. Let you finish your thought. But there's one thing I liked about the story about how the craftsman evolved throughout the story. At first, he was this poor, ugly wretch. And he felt sorry for him.
Yeah.
And then about halfway through, he starts describing himself as a villain, and it's always been a villain.
Yeah.
And it's just like
Like the
where did that
devils
come
was
from?
with
Like,
him and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and then you realize it's like you felt sympathy for him, like, oh, this come up with this crazy idea, it's wrong. But now he's like, I was always a villain.
He knew it was right.
Yeah.
He knew as he was cuddling all those European ladies in his lap
All
that
those
he
love affairs.
was doing something wrong.
And then
Indeed.
like I love how he describes it as love affairs.
Yeah, exactly.
All of my love affairs.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely. The problem with that is that only one member of that party knows that it's even any kind of a relationship whatsoever. The women don't know. So
That's called an obsession, my friend.
Yeah. And then he's like, I know what I was missing. I needed a Japanese woman
Yeah.
to feel that connection with.
Yep.
And so he stayed in the chair and he ended up there.
That was like his
completely
dream.
fell in love, like obsessed with her.
Yeah.
All of my other love affairs seem like nothing. They were nothing, man.
Yeah.
You were just inside of a chair that they sat on.
Exactly.
But I felt their contours.
This guy's
Yeah.
like the naughtiest Santa that ever existed.
Yeah. I really liked how he described the women because he couldn't see
Yeah.
their faces or
Yeah.
anything.
Right,
Couldn't
yeah.
tell the ugly or beautiful.
It was
but
a-
he just got the feelings from them.
Yeah.
Like how much they.
That is a hugely good point, man, because I got to tell you, it was almost like creepy how he justified how it was better.
Right.
Because he was like,
him,
it's
yeah.
better because I'm not paying attention to any of their physical attributes. But he was!
Yeah.
Just a different
Yeah.
Just like the fitness
the
level,
feel,
the fatness, or the
fitness.
skinniness.
Yeah, it just,
Right.
And then
wow,
the one
maybe not the
time.
face, but whoo.
Yeah.
And then that one time that world-renowned ballerina
Yeah.
sat down, and he's like, when she sat down, it wasn't even sexual. It was just like a goddess came and
Yeah,
visited
he's
or
like a
something that.
fairy, like
Yeah.
bestowed magical feelings on me.
So cool.
Just from the feel.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
really interesting how he describes that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
exactly.
as you read this kind of literature in Japan, does it give you any idea of like the core of the strangeness of anime and how it maybe evolved artistically from this.
Big time.
And especially the genre
time.
that he invented, which was called
Irugoru Nansensu.
Eruguru Nansensu. Oh,
Yeah.
nonsense.
yeah, exactly.
Eruguru Nansensu.
And I know
Amazing.
another thing about that author is that he was extremely big on sensory descriptions. So like he would really, in all of his stories, you'd get a lot of detail about the smell, the feel, the warmth, the taste, the sound, like everything. He goes into super great detail, and you definitely get a lot of that in this book when he's describing
it was phenomenal
women.
because it was almost like you felt, heard, like not smelled in this case.
You were in a very intimate role with this character.
He kept smell out of it, probably for a strategic reason in this case. But the other senses, he gave you a lot of, especially the way that you feel.
The touch,
The touch,
because he was feeling everything through this chair.
A thin layer of leather.
If it was that thin, they wouldn't have liked it.
Yeah, right. There had to be some padding there, I'm sure.
Had to be.
Yeah.
Plus, he's a great craftsman, so the chair was goddamn comfortable.
Right. Yeah.
But
But yeah, after reading this story, I will never look at a chair the same way ever again.
Won't either, dude.
You ever see a giant chair? Just kick it a little bit before you sit down.
I gotta tell you guys this. I don't know how this didn't make it into like a Goosebumps or like something just being like copied over. It's a historical short story.
I know.
And it's so easy, a creepy chair. How many great things could you do with that in some shitty 90s show?
I know.
Or book. Not that Goosebumps was shitty, by the way. I mean, you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah.
Shitty, like, quick remake. Mm-hmm. And then,
The quick cash grab.
I know they made some manga of it in Japan later on.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was turned into that. And I think the story differed a little bit from how this ended.
Ooh,
it
interesting.
definitely would have had to.
Yeah.
Because of this, we don't know what... We really didn't get her ending, let's be honest.
Right.
She's either going to go to that with a goddamn katana or burn it or something. Like, throw a Molotov cocktail on it. Like, motherfucker. Or she's going to be like, oh, good thing.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be like...
I'll be watching you.
But, whoo.
Yeah.
Yowza.
Yeah, man. Yeah, good stuff. Were there any other topics that you guys wanted to touch on with this one?
I don't know.
I think we covered the gist of it.
Yeah.
I'd like to point out that Edogawa Ranpo is a phenomenally creative pen name. And when I say creative, yes, you would maybe argue with me, oh, that's not creative, it's just Edgar Allan Poe. But if you know anything about Japanese culture and the way that words and alphabet work there with katakana, you kind of realize that it was extremely well thought out and strategic to both sound Japanese and
English. Phonetic English.
Phonetic English.
Yeah.
Because Edogawa can be Japanese, Ranpo can be English. And he separated them really well and purposefully that way so that it would seem Japanese to Japanese people, but people who were maybe outside of that realm would get a sense to what his true personality or interests were, which was really pretty cool.
Yeah.
And creative.
Cool. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested about this guy. I'm probably going to read more of his stuff.
We should. I think so.
Yeah, I read just an extremely brief synopsis of some of those other stories. He has a lot of occult in his stories, so that's right up my alley. So I think this author is definitely worth checking out more of.
So after we did not too long ago, we did the Pet Cemetery.
Yeah,
And that was a blast.
yeah,
And I think that we need to bring, we love epic fantasy on this podcast, obviously, every one of us here. But we may need to bring a little bit of this good horror into the mix occasionally.
I am
And
all for that.
Yeah. Well, especially because, I mean, if you think about, I don't know if any of you out there played games like, was it Eternal Darkness?
Yeah. Sanity's Requiem.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much literature, games, movies out there that kind of touch on some of these historical horror elements.
Right.
But the definition of horror is always a question mark because it's
Yeah.
not what we define it as it is today.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of kind of exploring that topic a little bit because I find that the best fantasy authors pull from it a little bit.
For sure.
And
yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Horror definitely is something that adds a lot of tension and interest in the stories, and it can be horror can be titillating as well. Like it can really kind of get your blood flowing and really make you think about things that you're not normally confronted with. So that's another aspect to horror that I think is certainly appealing for all modern day audiences.
That's cool, man. I am out of a beer.
Yep, same here.
Same, just about.
So, folks, we're at 36 minutes. What do you guys think? Should we call it a day or should we refill?
I think we should call it a day on this one.
All right.
Let's call it a day. Let's refill our beers and double check our chairs.
I agree there, sir. I agree there. In that case, folks, we highly recommend you go check out Edogawa Ranpo and
Read The Human Chair.
check out The Human Chair. See what you think. See how you feel afterwards. And then keep very close attention to when your chair's caressing your thighs. Cheers.
Every move.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Lit Literature. If you liked us, please check out our social media at Lit Literature 1 at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't hesitate to join in on the conversation. We appreciate the conversation, the questions, book recommendations, anything of that sort. Join in right on the social media websites. And don't forget to check us out at our website, litliterature.com, and our upcoming projects, though there aren't many now besides Lit Literature, you can find at lyket.net, Lyket. We do have a Patreon account, but if you truly want to support us, please like and share. Cheers.